For today's podcast, are you on a Scrum team and do you share the members of that team with other activities happening in the business, or do members of that team do in-sprint work in pursuit of the sprint goal and production support work at the same time? So you're sharing team members with different activities. That's what we're going to talk about today.
It's an awesome topic because you mentioned sprint goal. So, does the sprint goal, in your case, include supporting work that's already out there in production, right?
Never. I've never heard of a sprint goal.
I've never heard of it. Okay. Yeah. So, look, if it did, then we wouldn't have this podcast because it's already included in the scope of the work for the sprint, and then you're not sharing anything. Your team members are doing the work of the sprint, i.e. delivering the goal, which is inclusive of supporting production. But we realize that's not reality, right? This doesn't happen. People have their interests at heart, and they just say, go build this. Well, what about this stuff we just put out there? Yeah, that too, right? So on top of doing development work, net new development work, your team is supporting production work too. That's the nexus of this podcast, I think.
Do you want to start by reading the Scrum Guide and the Scrum Guide's guidance on teams? Before we dug into this, I would have put money on the Scrum team members are dedicated to the Scrum team. That was in the Scrum Guide, and I've since learned that is not in the Scrum Guide. So, let's take us just a second out of our discussion to read what is actually in the Scrum Guide.
You and I both would have lost money on that because I believe the same thing, but I was surprised to see it's not there.
So here's the Scrum Guide, and here's the section I want to highlight. And for everyone listening on audio, it says, the Scrum team is responsible for all product-related activities from stakeholder collaboration, verification, maintenance, operation, experimentation, research and development, and anything else that might be required. They are structured and empowered by the organization to manage their own work. Working in sprints at a sustainable pace improves the Scrum team's focus and consistency. Trust me, I checked because I thought dedicated was in there, so I went back a Scrum Guide version, just looking. I scoured the internet. It is not in there. I lost money on that one. I bet at the horse race, and I wish I could say I came out ahead. I did not. I lost.
I lost on the same bet as well. But one of the things in that list of things in the Scrum Guide that is not actually detailed out, but it's included by reference, is documentation. Sometimes people say, well, it's not a job. Just get somebody else to write it. Nah. Anything else that's required, right? So it's the all and sundry. You have to do the work in order to deliver full customer value. That basically is what it boils down to. So you have a team that's doing all of that.
I'd put that under the banner of operation or
anything else.
Or quote, anything else.
Anything
else. I love anything else made in the Scrum Guide.
Well, change management is another one. They don't call it out, but you need to manage that. You're introducing some kind of deviation from the norm, right? I.e. change. Mm-hmm. So you have to manage that with your customers. Change management is an art as well as much as it is a science.
Yeah.
It's not included here, but I think it's covered by anything else, the umbrella term, right?
Right.
And there's probably a few other things in there too, I imagine. Upskilling your customers to be able to use the features you've just put out there. Right? All of those things are under that same banner, I think. Is the Scrum team doing that, or are you just simply saying, we're just going to toss it to somebody else? Or are you saying, we do it, but we don't really know how to handle that because we're also doing development work?
So we started with the topic of being on Scrum teams where the team members are not dedicated to the team. We started realizing that the topic had to do with development doing support work on stuff that they built, and that's a regular thing. Well, also there's the idea that like if you have senior developers, or especially if you're like, there's nowhere on here to introduce the advanced concept of having enabling teams of like senior developers or DBAs or whatever. They're never going to be part of your team. They're all shared. That's not on this list of topics. Maybe it should be, but the topic was sharing team members with non-sprint work. So a team member is dedicated to your sprint that you're managing as a PO, but also they're doing other work in the business. That could be work for their technical leads. It could be work for their direct supervisor they actually work for. It could be mentoring, that kind of stuff. Basically anything that's not in your sprint, work dedicated to your sprint, they're involved in that kind of stuff. So sprint work meaning feature development for your product. Mm-hmm. But then they're doing production support for your product in the field. But again, because maybe like you don't have a support department, or maybe your company's small, or maybe your company's cheap and doesn't want to hire an actual support engineers. Many reasons. So the only guidance in the Scrum Guide is the Scrum team is responsible for all product-related activities. My interpretation of this is you build it, you own it. If you build it,
Yeah.
you're going to support it forever. It's basically the Fast and Furious of product development happens in this bullet point. I think it's actually, the more we read this portion of the Scrum Guide, the more terrible I think it is. Because I don't think terribler is a word.
Terribler? No,
Terrible.
it
is now.
That's not a word. But it basically says if your Scrum team is responsible for a piece of the application or the whole application itself, you now own it forever and ever. Amen.
There's context here, and I think that if you are starting up an application and you have a very small team and you're founding some startup, then generally everybody is doing a bit of everything. And yes, you are as the developing team, you're required to go kind of above and beyond to make sure that your product is successful, right? But at some point that becomes untenable. At some point there is some line in the sand and you're going like, okay, wait a minute. We really do need to establish some guidelines and something here where we do have some kind of cutoff and says we do need to support our application, but at this point now we've grown a customer base and we just can't have everything fall on our team. And that's when we start kind of expanding the team and we start creating additional roles and things like that. And I think that's when that part of the Scrum Guide, where it's everything in that sentence in that Scrum Guide would be applicable in some cases, but in not all. Like every company has their own situation, their own roles and resources and expertise, and in ways in which they split those things up and transfer them in and out of departments or whatever. Ultimately, I think it would start in a very immature team or an immature product. Everything falls on everybody, but as you grow, I think is where there becomes some kind of natural dividing lines.
I don't follow where actually both of y'all are going right now. I think what you're saying is we started with a small product, it got successful, it grew, it became larger in scope and in usage, basically, but the volume in which support tickets and requests and whatnot rolled into my team became much larger for my team to support. Is that where we're going with this?
That's that untenable part I was talking about. At some point it becomes where support is the only thing you can do and you no longer have the resources to even do development.
I already disagree about scaling. Like that's what we're about to launch into. We're about to launch into scaling.
Basically. I think that, to your point, I think scaling that's what I'm getting to in
Right.
that paragraph of the Scrum Guide when we're talking about the Scrum team and responsibilities. That paragraph means something very different to different teams based on their size and their maturity and the organization's size and maturity and the manner in which they I guess, product and in general. But
I would be interested in just searching the Scrum Guide for the word scaling or scale, because from what I recall, at least the previous Scrum Guides, they really didn't care about that. They were just looking at the team as though it was just a singular unit.
There's no
right?
scale.
There's no scaling. So this is my argument to the argument, I guess, is if you have, especially if you're a small entrepreneurial outfit and you've just launched something, you have to babysit this thing in production. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, you're being asked to either enhance it or come up with a new product, whatever it is. This is not enough hands on deck, right? You've got people bailing water off the ship. You've got people doing all of these things. How do you manage that? That's the crux of this, right? And what I'd like to do is throw it back at you, Brian, and say, I understand you disagree, but how do you handle this then?
Well, first of all, let's go back to the textbook before we jump into any disagreement or agreement on this one. Let's go right back to the Scrum Guide, okay?
The assumption is you're doing some kind of Scrum, Scrum band.
You can see
Scrum
here.
butt.
You can see here at the top. I'm searching for MULT. I'm searching for multiple. There's only 3 instances in the Scrum Guide multiple. So it says if Scrum teams become too large, they should consider reorganizing into multiple cohesive Scrum teams, each focused on the same product. So there's that. Multiple increments may be created within a sprint. Okay, multiple increments in one sprint. And then the last one is talking about establishing and committing to a definition of done. If there are multiple Scrum teams working together on a product, they all kind of need to agree.
Common definition.
Yeah, common definition. Yeah. Multiple increments within a sprint. That's kind of what I'm talking about, but I think multiple cohesive Scrum teams coming out of one Scrum team when they get too big. I think that's kind of what we're talking about. If you have one product and it blows up and you suddenly find yourself, like if you suddenly find yourself in fear of success, like I would tell teams, like when I used to be on contract, like not even as a dedicated product manager, I would tell business leaders, like as like their Agile coach, I would tell them the worst enemy of your teams right now would be runaway success.
Yeah, absolutely.
It would be your worst enemy because you had no control. You don't even have an idea over your processes. Like in a small company, when you encounter a new business process and your people are kind of taking care of it, and they're like, well, I figured this out and I figured out how to do whatever, and I kind of rubbed two sticks together and a fire happened and then we were all warm. Like your business leadership should step in to say, then whenever we need to start a fire in the future, we need to figure out the most efficient way to do that, figure out who in the company is the best at it. They need to teach everyone, and then we'll all know how to start a fire. And then when you want to start a fire, you go to this person and say, what should I do? And then your process is locked down. You know what your business process is.
I feel like small companies do that reasonably well, but mid to large size companies, you lose them.
Not only you lose them, but you lose your mind.
You do.
As a layer of middle management tries to fight amongst one another to decide whose person is going to teach the organization the best way of starting a fire, even if they have nobody who understands how to start a fire.
That's assuming that they've decided that they're going to find someone to teach the organization to start fires, right? So using this analogy, my experience is this whack-a-mole kind of firefighting thing where everybody, it's coming at them and they're just figuring it out just however they can. To your point, there's no leadership stepping in and saying, "What we wrangle this in, we need to have a process across the board."
Would you call that chaos management? Can we write a book on that? Our book is out next week. Chaos Management
2.0.
Wait, I got to make sure that's not a real book. I'm sorry.
It might be a real book.
Meaning just
Taming the chaos.
Yeah, just throw some reins around the chaos and maybe just ride the chaos to victory over time. Yeah, that's first of all, I'm not here to say that works or doesn't work. Doesn't work. But also, that's not the topic of our podcast. I got to bring you back to the topic of our podcast.
You're the one that brought it up, dude.
So that might be a different podcast.
Listen. Okay. I bring so many things up that are tangential. Tangential was a word on my calendar for the day. I bring so many things up that segue us that you can't really hold it against me. So let's go down the road of you're part of a product team. You maintain a product for users. And your product that's out there in production occasionally gets support tickets in that you have to look into and resolve. Let's go down this road, okay?
Because I feel that now. I
feel there's a lot of people that are in this segment of the business right now that could be helped by this little tiny clip that we're about to cut right now. We're pro wrestling. We're cutting a clip right now. So you start a sprint and you say, "Hey, we have this work. We want to be dedicated. We want to punch out this work." But also, every couple of days, one of my developers on the sprint gets pulled off to look into a production support issue. They don't know how long that's going to take. Like you can't really estimate that work. You can't really bring it in. So how do you deal with that?
On teams that are what I call moribund teams that are basically...
Did you just make up a word?
No, it's a real word. Check it out. MORIBUND. These teams struggle with this, and they will do artificial things like, oh, I will just take these two people here, Fred and Bob, or Bob and Mary. We'll put them over there to put out fires. And the fires somehow don't cease. So there's fires every sprint, and these two people get burned out by just putting out fires. Their will to live basically extinguishes, right? When they see their colleagues working on bright, shiny new things. So then Scrum Masters come into the picture and they go, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to rotate these people so that they don't burn out. All they've done is just removed any modicum of domain knowledge that these two people in support had built up and decimated it to zero.
Sure.
That's what they've done.
Sure.
So you're just basically circling the drain at that point. So one of the things, going back to your question, that you can do if you're forced into this scenario, because you wouldn't volunteer into it, you can just pick a number. Pick a number or don't pick a number, right? So let's just go down those two paths. Pick a number and say 10% of the capacity of this sprint is reserved for support. Am I right in 10? Maybe not. Maybe it's more than 10. So just live it for a couple of sprints and see and inspect and adapt, right? That's one approach. The other is don't even pick the 10%. Look at what happened. Yesterday's weather. Just keep looking at it and go, for the last 4 sprints, on average, you spent 18% of our time doing support work. So how about we reserve 20% and see how it works out? That way, two things happen. One is you're not scrambling to deliver the development work of that sprint, despite the fact that you're fighting fires. That's the first thing. Because the worst case out of that is, people will say we're done. We've met the sprint goal, and to hell with the quality. That's what happens. Or the other thing that will happen is you get the team to own the work of the sprint, which typically is embodied in the sprint goal, right? That includes develop this plus production support. That is the work. It's not like we do production support because we have to, right? That pivot needs to happen. The work is the work, which means production support plus development. You just ameliorate that going forward. That's my 2 cents worth, 8 cents worth.
So that makes sense to me. But if you have a sprint with a sprint goal and you have work items or whatever that come into the sprint, how do you visualize that work alongside? You could have never predicted that 3 support items would roll in the middle of your sprint while your team's trying to punch out these new features. Because it's the same team members servicing both backlogs. Or are they different backlogs? I don't know. How do you visualize? Are they different?
That's a tremendous question, because this is something that challenges teams all the time, right?
Sure.
How do you visualize it? Because if you can't visualize it, you can't actualize on it, right? So one of the things that I say is just keep one backlog, right? Because that way you're pulling from a singular backlog. On that backlog, you have work items that say, develop this, develop that. Or work items that say, support this, support that, right? Always start with a verb, right? So what happens is the team sees on their board all the work that they have to develop. Maybe above that, there's a lane that says firefighting or whatever. You can pick your own metaphor and put that work in there. The next step, people on the team own all of that work. So it's not like, these 2 people are always dedicated to firefighting, right? So it comes down to, here's an issue. Who can best help with this? The developer that developed that piece of functionality might be the best person to investigate that, perhaps. They may be working on something else when that happens. I'm assuming this is not a clean, we start the sprint off with these items that we have to support. It's like it just crops up whenever, right? You're playing whack-a-mole. Yeah. So you're on the 3rd day of the sprint or the 9th day of the sprint, something shows up. Reserve the capacity to kind of work with that, but just look at it and say, who's best able to help? And the best way to do that is to have a discussion with the team and say, here's an issue, who can help? And encourage people to put their hand up and go, I had something to do with that. Maybe I can look into it. What are you working on today? I'm working on this. Who can help work on that, right? And then work with the product owner to say, we have this thing coming up. What would you like to do? Prioritize it, right? Yeah. They may say, this thing's off a few pixels. We can fix it next sprint. Or, move this guy. Kevin, you're now working on this, right? And whatever you're working on, I'm okay to let it slide. That's fine. That's the decision that PO makes all the time.
Once it's in at the team level, to your point, consult with your team. But I would say prior to it getting to that point, to start having a conversation, if this is something that's coming about over and over again, to have the larger conversation of how to deal with the root cause of this, right? So instead of dealing with it each and every sprint, try to figure out, okay, is there a way for us to mitigate this ahead of time? Maybe there isn't, but having that larger conversation with the team to have an understanding of how to handle that. That's point number 1. 2, I would say that I literally am living this right now, and I think there's so much dependent on the team structure, the level of expertise of the developers, and their knowledge base, and what they're comfortable with. I have one person on my team, and all she does is bugs.
That goes back to my previous point.
Understood. So basically I have a team, this was all created before I ever came on, but essentially what I have is a team, but on this team, it's really been naturally a separation between senior and junior developers. The senior developers are the long-term, they really are the ones who've written this code from the beginning of time, literally. And there's a lot of trust issue on letting anybody else touch their code. There's that stuff that's going on, right? This is my code. There's that. So that's a whole kind of a different thing. Maybe a whole different conversation, right? But there was this natural division already where I actually had a support team living in my development team.
Yeah.
So I am right now, and this is what I was kind of talking to you about, is trying to create a separate Kanban board, because what they're trying to do is create sprints, and all of these bugs and fires keep coming in and blowing things out of the bottom, right?
Sure.
So my hypothesis is I would like to you guys are already doing this. You're already throwing all these things. You're doing bugs and reporting and all these kind of keeping the lights on things. Those are automatically being assigned to somebody, this half of the team. So what I'm going to do is create a Kanban board that is going to be constantly prioritized. So all you have to do, which works really well for support, right? And we have something that's on fire, we're throwing that at the top, everything goes down. Now I can concentrate on sprints and development work in a manner where I can move forward, and instead of kind of all of these things being mixed up in the sprint.
So are you maintaining two separate boards? One board represents the sprint goal that you set, and the other board representing the work that is flowing in as it comes in and as it changes over time. Because like one is like a graph that goes up and down that
Correct.
like you don't really have control over, you just have to respond to. The other one is a set amount of work. It should theoretically should be flat.
Right.
The amount of work that comes in. Whatever you pick, sprint over sprint equals to your velocity, doesn't go up, doesn't go down. It only goes up and goes down as you turn in or figure work, right? So one should be a graph that goes up and then it gradually comes down and then goes up and then gradually comes down. The other one goes all over the place as support stuff comes in. But when you overlay those two graphs, here's the uncontrollable work versus here's the controllable work. That's probably a good way to represent it to leadership. Can you tell a story from those two overlapping graphs together? If you sync the end of period review for Kanban with your sprint review, and you say, let's look at the two graphs side by side.
Superimpose.
Yeah, superimpose. Just over each other.
Yeah.
Let's look at them together. I'm guessing you're going to see a dip in your sprint velocity. At the same time, you see a spike in your Kanban intake of work.
I would agree with that.
And if you show that to leadership, I guess we're talking about metrics now. If you show that to leadership, like the immediate discussion point should not be like, why couldn't you punch out all the features that I promised to customers or that sales was writing checks about or whatever. Like the immediate result should be, oh yeah, that makes total sense. Like we had a problem in production and you had to stop working on this new feature that we were hoping was going to put us over the edge or whatever. And it makes sense. The two graphs over each other, superimposed, it makes total sense. You can't really change the data.
But separating those things out, you don't think separating those things... Okay, so I think you were starting off with a question. Are you talking about maintaining two separate boards?
I started out... My starting question was, are you actually maintaining a Kanban board for the support work and a Scrum team sprint work, a normal sprint board?
That is my intention and my hypothesis to see if that's going to work. That said, I have
setting it up.
So I am setting up right now.
Right.
So to see how this is going to work. This is also literally taking taking all of those quote unquote support type, maintenance type tickets off of me completely. I have because once they go to tier 3, my tier 3 support, they are the ones who prioritize and put it onto the board. It becomes they become a part of support. You know what? I got really excited when you started talking, Brian, because when you were talking about
First time ever.
So here's the thing is, like I said, I have this hypothesis. We're going to try this out. I'm working really closely with our tier 3 higher level support. And like I said, they've been prioritizing and assigning them to sprints, which has just been prolonging, creating multiple additional handoffs, increasing the turnaround time of all of these things. So I'm going to end up removing 4 handoffs by doing it this way, and so the reduction in turnaround time for these is going to be, I think, amazing. But what's so cool is about what you said is the dev side that is going to be receiving potentially they're the last lifeline to resolving these things, are also going to be working hand in hand with our level 3 support and doing some paired programming and things like that, so they can do some knowledge transfer. So our level 3 starts leveling up. So less and less becomes coming over. So we have this knowledge transfer going over. So I feel like there's some real benefit in multiple ways to potentially resolve some of these solutions dependent on your situation. This happens to be mine.
Yeah, I will tell you this from working earlier in my career in QA and working on support tickets, nobody wants to be the maintenance developer.
Bingo.
Even if you're development, QA, whatever, investigatory, like private eye, PI or whatever, like private eye, it doesn't matter. Nobody wants to be like. There are certain people that really find a lot of satisfaction digging in to problems and finding the reasons behind them. However, nobody wants to like. This is just my opinion for anyone listening out there. I guess I'm looking directly at the camera. Just again, my opinion from working on a lot of garbage support tickets in a lot of legacy code. Nobody wants to play the role of the development person who's dedicated to legacy code or who does maintenance full-time, the full-time maintenance developer. I've also been in organizations where they hire offshore, by the way, they hire entire teams to be the break fix development team or a maintenance team or a, I don't know, keep the lights on team. I'm trying to think of all the references.
So what I'm telling you is that I know that this isn't necessarily textbook and wouldn't be the way that I would be doing things if I had some other things that I could change. But for right now, in trying to solve a problem or trying to make things better.
Yeah.
So we're going to try this experiment and see. But to your point, that natural division as far as kind of the maintenance or the product support and all that was already happening. Mm-hmm. So I'm just creating a way to hopefully alleviate the confusion, the handoffs. And so this is just the way that I tried to solve this problem.
I don't know if we really landed on this, but when we were talking about visualizing work earlier, like I personally, the way I would handle this is I would put all of the incoming support requests onto a Kanban board to be investigated, and I don't even know what the stages of that board would be. I'm sure if we stayed here for another hour, I could probably build you like the ideal board, and something. It would be something along the lines of like first request comes in, and like the first steps of investigation happen because that's your support people walking through their checklists and stuff like that, and then there'd be another layer of triage, some sort of layer of triage before it gets through to my developers. I don't know what that layer is, and then when my developers get involved, there's probably another layer of triage to figure out if this is like a bug or like how deep it is or how deep it goes into the system, and then whether we actually want to solve it as a bug, or sometimes you encounter bugs that actually require an enhancement to solve. So it's an enhancement in disguise of a bug, meaning the system that we built until this point has constraints on it. And the way the customer is using the system, nobody ever really envisioned that. So we had to build a whole new module or a whole new, I don't know, section of basically an expansion of functionality that we never really thought about. I feel the companies that really are losing money on this is like the worst. I'm pointing out the worst of the worst only because I've worked on those teams. Yeah. The companies who just deal with it. Oh, a customer just asked for it. We just got to deal with it. Doesn't matter how much money we got to throw at it. Just make the customer happy. They end up doing enhancements under the guise of bug fix to solve these problems. When you don't have a product person involved in that discussion, which we haven't talked about up until this point. We have not talked, like product people basically are missing from the equation until we just walked in right now. Other than prioritization, a couple of, we can quibble about that. But now where we talked about like a developer investigated, support person investigated, development team member investigated, because that could be anybody. It could be a QA person, it could be development. Now we're at the point where we have to fix it. Is it really a bug? Well, I don't know. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it as a team. What are you doing today? Well, what are you doing today? Like, let's go with the worst spot. What did you do yesterday? What are you doing today?
Do you have any blockers?
We're going here. Do you have any blockers? No blockers. No blockers at all. I have no idea how I'm going to solve this issue. No blockers. That's where we're going. Like, well, yesterday I investigated the support issue that came in, and I worked support. I happened to be the person that picked up the phone. I investigated the item. I found that they're trying to do this or whatever, and they're coming back, and the system was never designed to do that. So in order to fix it, we got to implement this and add this and expand this code base, whatever. Wait a minute. What are we doing here? Like, let's talk about this for a second. What are we doing? We have to add all this functionality to resolve the bug that the customers are like. Let's step back for a second and talk about this.
That I agree, first of all, but is that discussion, what form does that take? For me, that's the first triage. Is it a usability issue? Is it a user issue?
Sure.
They're just not using the system right.
Sure.
Then it becomes, well, just train them.
All
That's
right.
the first triage. And then subsequently from that, which is when the product people really kick in and they go, it's not a bug. You could just tell them that this is how it works, or they have a point, right? Maybe we should just include this, right? And then the product people come in and say, what's the size of the audience, and then on it goes. But for me, I think we started with this development person who says I was on call, etc. You're gonna lose good people quickly that way, right? So maybe just have a triage team that looks at the stuff and carve out time during the day, an hour a day, half an hour a day, depending on your volume. This team is a cross-functional team in that you have your team QA member there because they tested this stuff before it rolled out into production, so they're valuable. Depending on the item, you could have the developer if they're available. Now, sometimes you don't want to pull them off what they're doing. Okay, how about your tech lead or the architect? Bring them in, right? And then
Design,
the PO, right?
maybe?
Designer, maybe the UX person. Just a small team that come in and discuss this. However many items you have in that time box and decide where they fall, right? You can do all that in the tooling. So please, no more Google Sheets. You can do all this in the tooling because these become work items that get placed in the backlog with various statuses. And that, if you do that, this is what I call the holistic approach of handling these things, as opposed to you're the SWAT team, right? And people get tired of that very quickly. And everybody else is developing stuff, so-called in the lab. And these people envy these people don't like those people, etc. So it's a soluble problem, but you have to work at it.
We sort of talked about non-sprint work in terms of support items rolling through. Like we talked about work coming back into your team from outside, meaning customers are reporting problems. What we did not talk about is your team being divided because they're working on things in your sprint for the product manager, agreed on sprint goal, but then their supervisor or some executive with a salesperson or somebody's asking them, hey, buddy, just add this one thing. I'm your supervisor on paper. I'm your hiring manager, what resource manager. There we go. I'm your resource manager. Just do this one thing. It's super quick. Add a little checkbox.
Yeah.
Easy.
Back in the day when I was a developer, I would just say, if it's that easy, you could do it.
We did not talk about the covert backlog.
Yes, the covert backlog. Oh my God, this is where the real POs shine, when they get on top of that and go, okay, wait, this stuff over here that's kind of out there in the ether because it's one-to-one, right? It's never made it on the backlog.
Right.
No, put a stop to that. So you would educate your team to say to these people that come in and say, you're smart, Brian. You're a great developer. You can knock this out in your lunchtime.
5 minutes.
Yeah.
5 minutes.
Encourage those team members to say, I could. However, I don't have those 5 minutes, right? Please talk to Stormy, who's our product owner, right? Yeah. If you encourage your teams to do that, you're going to basically reduce that, that cone, right? Where people just come in and bring you all that clandestine work, which really subverts the team completely. It's terrible.
Yeah.
And it happens all the time, too.
It does. And do you know what? You don't know what you don't know. Right. So as a product owner or a product manager, that's not something you can circumvent or assist with until you know about it. And so unfortunately, discover. And that's what I'm finding. That's what I've found in my experience is that, oh my gosh, this has been going on. Wow. Okay. And it's just some comment that was made or something that shows up somewhere. And all of a sudden I'm realizing something is uncovered and I'm going, okay, or somebody asked a question, goes back to product. All of a sudden somebody comes back to you and says, there's something wrong with this thing that you guys built. And I'm going, what thing? Right. What are you talking about? Yeah. And I have no record, no nothing. And so that's lovely.
Sometimes it happens at places like the Daily Stand-Up where somebody says, yeah, I'm working on this, but I just spent some time on this over here. And that's when you go, what is that?
Yeah.
Right? Why are you even working on that? Yeah, I agree. Good Scrum Master helps.
So
this requires a team, though, right? It's not just the product owner. It's not just the Scrum Master. This requires a team to kind of get on top of it.
A team and good leadership and safety. So what you gave was an example that was a direct report that was given a task by their supervisor. Yeah. That's put them in a really bad position, right? Yeah. Now, maybe if we've got a good team and a good product person and a great Scrum Master, maybe that is something that I as a product owner or product manager would collaborate with my Scrum Master on for sure.
Scrum Master for certain, because again, like going back to our I guess it's a couple of podcasts ago now with IO, they're the person that should be unafraid of starting conflict by saying, hey, I see that you are tasking Scrum team members with these work items that are not in the backlog. Let's talk about that. Why is that happening? Why are you a teleport person? I don't know.
Bring in the PO and say, I'm assuming, Brian, that you've spoken to the PO, right? And then if there's the three of you, you say, so you know about this, right, Stormy? That's when Stormy says, I've never heard of this.
Right.
The Scrum Master shouldn't feel bad at doing this.
Right.
That is their job.
That's by the way, like, I don't know if like people are aware, but that's confrontation right there. I think of all the people, all of the corporate managers. Sorry, I went right up to that ski slope,
Yeah,
and I couldn't.
You stopped.
I couldn't.
And then you went,
I couldn't bring myself. I looked over the edge, and I was like, "Oh God!" I looked down. I couldn't bring myself to go over the edge. Yeah, all the corporate managers in that role there. It's confrontation. Like that's your role. Your role in leadership as a Scrum Master is to bring us to that edge and be like, we can go over together. Trust me, we'll all have fun. Like when we all have our arms up in the roller coaster and we're like, no.
Oh dear.
Yeah. And we all go back. We're like, you know what? This argument is, we're afraid of going over this hump in the roller coaster track, and we're just gonna stop. We're all like, half the car's got their hands up, half the car is super scared, and we're just gonna stop at the edge of the track and then just back up and not go over this. That's where we are right now. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. We need to go over the edge, because like over the edge is where the decision is. That's where moving forward or working through it or learning or whatever. That's where it is. We need to go over. And if it falls on me as the only business leader in the room, as the only responsible adult in the room, as the only irresponsible adult in the room, I will push us over that edge.
You know what? As you were telling your example, I actually came to mind a real life story, an experience that I had where I had a development manager. I don't know exactly what title it was, but anyway, he was newly hired. He came on, and all of the developers were now reporting to him. This was when, in the before times, we were all co-located, all in the same room, right? And he was doing it, right? He was going into the tickets, into the developers' tickets, and adding tasks into, like, adding on individual tasks.
Sure, yeah.
And they would just kind of discover these, and he would say, hey, you needed to do this, and you're missing this, you need to be doing this, you need to be doing this. And thank goodness that I had a fantastic Scrum Master, number one, that noted they were not happy about it, and they were feeling very much obligated. I mean, they're directly reporting to the person who's putting instructions in their tickets and telling them how and what they should be doing. But I had a great Scrum Master who realized this very quickly and brought us all together initially, myself, him, and the development manager, and said why this wasn't working. We have a team that's empowered, and we work really hard to have the trust and the safety. And if you need to make a suggestion, feel free, but we don't need you digging in their tickets and putting in instructions, and why that was. So I was very much supported, and he resolved the behavior. It was something, and we did really well for it. The team did really well for it. I mean, they were very successful.
It happens all the time with architects who these developers supposedly report to. They will come in and say, here are 2-3 things that you need to do. Oh, by the way, I found this great tool. Go investigate that. It's just part of that story. It really isn't, but there's your scope creep right there. And the developers don't feel empowered to be able to push back, because that's their boss, right? This happens all the time. Yeah, I think we just need to call that out and say, how is that piece adding value, right, to the acceptance criteria? It's not. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I'm not shutting you out. I'm saying this tool may be fantastic. Can we just maybe create a spike to investigate that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
And I'll be happy to pull it into the next sprint, because we're fully loaded this sprint.
Well, also, I'll be happy to lobby for it at your next refinement, which you should invite me to, because anybody should feel free to invite whoever needs to be there to the refinement. And I think the same way about, like, oh, we need to pull in a story about bringing our, I don't know, production database or production whatever to the latest version. or to a whatever, to a cutting edge version or something like that. I don't know, whatever it is. Oh, maybe we're two like minor versions behind in like maybe we're on like, I'm trying to think of if the version of like, oh, Mongo, yeah. Like if your current version of Mongo is like, if your current version of Mongo is like 3 versions behind, you have to go like several major versions. Well, you probably shouldn't be several major versions behind. You probably should only be like, I don't know, maybe one major version, a couple minor releases or whatever behind. So you only have to do like one skip ahead.
Right.
But you should really be pretty close to the production release schedule. Well, who maintains that? Who maintains that telepathic link to to the current version, right? Like who maintains like, oh, well, our current stack, like here's the versions that are most current and here's the versions we're on. Hey, you should know that every version that we go past the current version, that we're incurring risk, more and more and more and more risk over time. So somebody should be driving that into the refinements. Who is that? I mean, theoretically, I would think like my engineering leadership,
Sure.
engineering leads, system architects, you know what I mean? People like that, like they should be driving it. In lieu of everyone else, honestly, like all prioritization is the product manager's responsibility. So if I'm the business and I'm going to task somebody, I'm going to task the product manager to be like, hey, how did you not know we were 2 major versions behind of our Microsoft SQL database, and that we're out of whatever, maybe we have audits or compliance or something like that. You know what I mean?
That's a valid point about compliance, especially in regulated industries.
Yeah.
I treat those things as tech enablement items just to delineate the distinction between that versus real value add that somebody is paying for, right? Indirectly, they won't pay for this in time if you don't keep up, but that's tech enablement. And it's the architecture group that comes up with this, because product owners, they don't have to necessarily go figure all that stuff out, right? But they have to work with the backlog to get that delivered.
Yeah.
So these people feed that in, and often it's not urgent. And sometimes it can be like, oh, well, we have a vulnerability.
Yeah.
This patch has to happen.
Yeah.
That's more of an exception than keeping up with the versions and things like that, right?
Yeah.
But to your point about compliance, that's the other thing lately that I've been fighting is compliance is often bolted on at the end. So teams will work away, especially on a large program, multiple teams, and then go, okay, it's ready for prime time. Let's just go and get security checked and everything else. And everybody goes, yes, yes, yes. And then they go, what else is left? And somebody will go, compliance? And compliance teams go, now we find out about this, right? So I'm trying to head that off by having them engage with the product owners at the ideation phase, right? At the very beginning, right? And say, this is the work coming at you. It's not done yet, but it's coming at you. Put it on your radar, and then keep engaged throughout, because right at the beginning in the first sprint, work with the teams and say, listen, I know you're building this stuff. How about you consider these elements? If you do those, there'll be nothing for us to do at the end because it will be compliant.
Right.
So in other words, build it in rather than bolt it on, right? And initially the teams don't like it as much, and especially the technical arm of the company, they're not used to this. They go, well, why do we have to engage them now? We haven't even done the work. Like, that's when you need to engage them.
Yeah, right.
Right? So it's a culture change. And as we know, cultures take time to change, but I'm fighting that right now. So yeah, all of these things we need to kind of think about it holistically and say, what's the friction, and try and reduce that.
It is a culture change, but I feel the culture change could be enabled pretty significantly by changing the focus of metrics as you move through your product backlog, or your whatever production support, Kanban, or whatever you're using.
Whatever.
Like the how you look at everything we've talked about in terms of product metrics could do a lot to move this forward. Like I think of specifically the like who is looking out for my technical enablers, because I feel that out of all, like even the support like category stuff of things that bubble up and need to be worked on immediately and we didn't really know they needed to be, you know what I mean? Like they're unexpected work, a chaotic intake of work. The items that you need to work on that are not real attractive features or whatever, bring us into compliance of current database versions, or bring us into that kind of stuff, like real basic stuff. You could say, well, there should be a trade-off of product of we want to be in compliance, but also we need to put butts in seats and sell widgets and, you know what I mean, sell season tickets or whatever. Like, so like I'm willing to accept a certain amount of technical debt or risk so that we can move quickly with features. And there might be like a percentage here or there, like X percentage of our time is spent reducing technical debt, whereas X percentage of our time is spent implementing features to put out there to sell tickets, basically.
Absolutely.
But what metrics you look out for, track? What metrics you track?
Yeah.
What metrics you track makes a big impact on this. A huge impact on this, actually. Like if I were tracking the number of support tickets that came through that I resolved in the same period of the sprint, let's go down to the team level. We're gonna ratchet down to the team level. So forget leadership. Leadership is excluded for a second in our conversation. Okay, we're just talking about how many production support items do we punch out in a sprint, and how many planned sprint work items, features, bugs, whatever you want to call them. How many planned sprint work items versus how many production items. Here's our sprint iteration, number of work items we knock out. Here is our support Kanban above it, how many items we knock out. So we're talking about those two. Again, we're back to overlaying data over data. So let me overlay those two. And my assumption as a business leader who knows nothing about Kanban or velocity or your sprinty sprints or whatever you're using, I don't know anything about that. But I can show that when you have a dip in your sprint items, you have an equal uptick, or maybe not equal, but you have an uptick in your incoming,
a corresponding
uptick in your worked support items. So I should see, well, one graph is moving down, the other graph is moving up, or both graphs are moving equally along the line. Like if I'm just doing like line graphs, like the most simple,
Yeah.
So the metrics that you're providing, what metrics are we providing here? If we go all the way back to the beginning of the podcast where we started, if you have a team that's working on production support, but also they're expected to punch out features in a sprint, can I show those two graphs side by side? Like assuming I'm not trying to do any monkey business about like, oh, I'm going to put my support items inside the sprint and I hope my team can commit. Like I'm not even assuming that I'm doing that. I'm assuming already I have a board for production stuff that's Kanban. I have a sprint board that's planned in an iteration over a period of time. I just want to show the two over the same period of time. That's all I want to do, so that I can provoke a discussion with leadership of maybe we need another person dedicated to dealing with support items, or maybe we need another team to knock out sprint enhancement requests. Maybe I need something else. Maybe I need ... ellipsis, whatever. You know what I mean? It basically, I'm using metrics now to provoke another conversation. So how can I use metrics, like not to penalize the team, which again, most of the time, that's where the metrics are going. It's like, you're not moving fast enough.
Sticky situation.
You're not breaking these rocks in like
the pebbles.
into pebbles fast enough. Like that. God. How can I use the metrics to benefit as opposed to punish my team?
It's a great question, I think. I mean, one of the things you have to be mindful of is that the ALM tool of choice at your work may not allow you to do this superimposition that we talked about, right? You may have to do it externally, like manually. Sure. Some of the bigger ALM tools do allow you to create boards out of your sprint work, and then you could see different lanes.
I will jump in. I'm trying not to jump in, but I will jump in to say, like, leadership is the last people that will care that your tools suck. As long as you can present your story well, I feel that's where we're driving, is like you need to show the story of, as like, with the same pool of people, as production work increases in volume, the work we're doing on your goal to drive whatever strategy you're driving, I don't know what it is, retention or activation of users, whatever, I don't know what it is, that decreases as the chaos intensifies.
It just comes down to then showing where the team's effort was spent. Right. And we know what that looks like, right? Typically, it's capacity utilization. We spent the team's capacity doing this, and the opportunity cost was this, right? If you can show that, which pretty straightforward for most tools, That's the basis of your story. And then you have to articulate that with your leadership and say, this is where we're at.
Right.
Now, use the power of trending to your advantage, right? You could say, this is where we've been for the last 3 months.
Right.
And you can see how we're not delivering as much new functionality because we've got all these fires to fight.
Yeah.
And then go in and ask, because you never get something you don't ask for, and say, we need 2 people in order to stabilize the situation. I mean, most leadership would be open to that conversation. Management, on the other hand, may crack the whip and say, what are these people doing? Hurry up and get more out of them.
Yeah.
So you have to deal with that on a separate level.
So the metrics that I am, because understanding that right now there isn't an option for me to have that conversation. There just isn't. That conversation isn't one that I'm going to be able to have. Just we're not in a situation at my the conversation about being able to show, hey, we need more. We know we need more resources. We already know that. But we're not going there. My point is, wait.
Whoa. I'm concerned at this point about if leadership truly understands the environment that they're operating in, and you could be like, oh, they understand, they just don't care. I'm like, well, then what do they care about? Like, and now I would be even more concerned if I presented them with all the evidence and they've seen it and they understand that we cannot both deal with the heavy technical debt issues that we're incurring and also try to push forward feature development that brings in future sales and whatnot. They understand that. They understand it's not sustainable. We have to do one or the other. They do understand that. They just don't care. They're just like, just give me more features. I want to bring in new clients. I don't care that new clients all hate the application and that retention is 0. They log in once and they don't use it ever again. Like that's a very concerning in product management. In last podcast, we talked about the pirate metrics, the AARR metrics. And you can't maintain any of those if a customer visits your site once, has so many problems that they just are like, they're just unwilling to come back again, and they log in once, activate once, you basically got one shot of retention. You don't get them, and they don't come back again. The leadership that is just trying to like go out, sell something to a big customer, have them pay the money, and then move on to the next big customer, and then never check back in. I think I'm basically explaining the plot of Star Trek 2. Like we're gonna sell Khan on go living on this planet, and then we're never gonna check back on him, and then find out his planet was hit by a meteor, and now he's living in the wastelands basically. Like this is the plot of a movie here. Like but we don't care about that because like all of our incentives are based on something else. We don't care about anyone that we've ever sold the product to. So all these people that are over here that have already signed the contract, bought the new car, bought the used car at new car price, they don't exist to me. They already signed. We got their money. Don't care.
They're already in the assets column.
Don't
right?
care.
So you got to figure out what the motivation is. Maybe they're just looking to increase the revenue numbers because they want to flip the company. Who knows, right? This happens all the time.
Are we representing Brian and Ohm's software development company?
Yeah.
If we are, we're not representing it very well. Brian and Ohm's software development company is a top-notch firm. We would never do that ever.
Not during the daylight hours.
Not during daylight. There probably are people in the company that I mean, they are playing 3D chess while everyone else is playing checkers. Like they probably are. Like their incentives and what they're driving and trying to influence other people in the company. Like they are being disingenuous. That's where I'm going with
That's
this.
A great word.
Somebody signed into your product the first time, new, probably has nothing to do with people being actually satisfied that your product hits the mark and solves the problems. So if your salespeople are incentivized on the number of deals that you close and the revenue that those deals bring in on a B2B contract, when every actual customer of that B2B contract that signs on is extremely dissatisfied with the service that you're offering,
right,
you have a major disconnect. And that's kind of where I was going with how do metrics affect everything that we're talking about?
I mean, they're the center of all this. I think we had talked about doing a podcast just on metrics that matter.
Yeah.
This will fit into it quite nicely.
Yeah.
It behooves us all to figure out what is important to the leadership of your company and then align yourself to that, because everything else that you do, you can jump up and down and wave any metric you want that's not theirs, and they don't care.
I think that might be the point that Brian was getting to, though, is that maybe that's kind of a big issue. There may be
is.
some really, really important metrics
It is a huge
that
issue.
we're able to potentially show, but they aren't on the incentives or what the incentives are behind.
Yeah.
And that's with, I guess, any company. And always asking yourself, okay, what really is the motivation behind this?
Right.
The incentive. And that explains so much sometimes is when you think in that manner.